Let me get to yesterday. So the owners' meetings are taking place, and the league meetings are taking place, and Roger Goodell spoke, and he said a lot of interesting things. Okay, so Dan Snyder's Washington football team. Now, for a long time, Dan Snyder was just a bad guy, right? Remember, he was the first, I believe, only owner to charge fans to come see his team's open workouts early in the fall, right? Remember, when they had training camp, and this goes back probably 15 years ago, Dan Snyder, when he took ownership of the Washington football team, maybe it's 20 years ago, he made waves because he wanted to charge fans, and people revolted. They're like, that's not how we roll. He's not seen as a warm and fuzzy. He is seen as a guy who isn't well liked in many circles, but he's been crazy successful. Now he wants a new football stadium. People wanted him to change the name. He was defiant on that. Then they did change the name. And then, of course, there was this bombshell that was dropped about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, that he had a toxic culture in his offices with sexual harassment and some allegations of sexual assault. And the Washington football team, remember, was fined $10 million for their highly unprofessional environment. And Dan Snyder stepped down from running the day-to-day operations. And he put in his place, his wife. Roger Goodell said this, that is making waves across the Twitter sphere and the news sphere and the sports world. This is what he said about Dan Snyder being held accountable.
I do think he's been held accountable for. I think the organization has been held accountable. And I think we did an unprecedented fine. Dan Snyder has not been involved with the organization for now almost 4 months. We obviously are focused more on making sure the policies that they had, many which they put into place prior to this investigation, but also coming out of it, were put into place and that they will be maintained and that we can ensure that that will happen in this organization.
Here's Goodell on why the report will not be made public.
As you know, there was a summary of the findings. We had an independent counsel look at that. They worked on it almost a year. I think interviewed roughly 150 people, and I think close to 6 million documents that they worked through. But one of the important things by getting a professional that has worked in this space was making sure that you had people who were willing to come forward, most of which wanted to do so with security and privacy and anonymity, and it would be difficult for us to do that. And that not only affects the investigation that you're going through, but it affects future investigations and the credibility of that. So when you make a promise to protect anonymity, you need to stand by that. We're very conscious of making sure that we're protecting those that came forward. They were incredibly brave, incredibly open, and we respect the pain that they probably went through all over again to come forward. That was a very high priority for us.
That was Roger Goodell. And I not only buy into what he's saying, I agree with him. Right? It was bad enough that the Gruden stuff was leaked. Let's just be honest. What goes counter to what he's saying is the Gruden stuff was leaked. Now, the Gruden stuff may have been in the final report, and that's, and it was taken out because they found it. I actually think that the thoroughness of the investigation is proven by the Gruden stuff. But this is the point with all of these movements. It's like, look, finding the bad guy is important. Changing the culture is important. Holding people accountable is important. But there is, at least at some point, a limit. And what they're saying is, like, look, we are levying the greatest fine we've ever thrown down on a football franchise. There are no ties of knowledge between Dan Snyder and what was going on in the front office. And because they couldn't find any, he gets to keep the team and there's no additional punishment. But this is what, like, all of these movements are. They're really good in their spirit. Like, the Me Too movement is a incredibly important movement. Right? Incredibly important. In all honesty, like, I don't, the organization and some of the things they want, like Black Lives Matter, I don't agree with the branded movement, right? I don't believe that what BLM wants and what their website desired and whatever, but the idea of the treatment of minorities, frankly, the treatment of everybody at the hands of police officers, but that black people are made to fear police officers in routine traffic stops because of years of unfair treatment. Like, that is an important thing in our society. But again, there's a limit there. It doesn't mean all police are bad. It doesn't mean that you defund the police. Right? The Me Too movement is an important movement, but there does come a limit to where you just can't chase everything in every story and, okay, everybody has to lose their job and lose their ownership because they were ever associated with it. Like, if he wasn't harassing anybody, if he wasn't sending out emails with these pictures of the cheerleaders, and there's no smoking gun that shows that he had any knowledge of it taking place, what more can you possibly do? You find him $10 million. Remember, you find him $10 million, and then you had the pandemic when everybody lost a ton of money. So I know he's rich beyond belief. I know that based upon his overall value and the value of the franchise, it is a drop in the proverbial bucket. I understand all of that. Okay? I understand all of that. But I also understand that there's got to be a limit at some point. This was the Mike Vick thing, right? What Mike Vick did was terrible. Terrible. And truthfully, he went to jail not just because of what they did to dogs, but because he continually lied about it. But he paid his debt to society. That's it. That's it. They sullied his name. That's it. He'll forever walk around with that scarlet letter to some people, even if he's rehabilitated. And I know Mike Vick. I know people that know Mike Vick. He obviously has worked with us here at Fox Sports and Fox Sports Radio, and I like him a lot. I think he's a hell of a dude, and he's seen the bottom. I mean, he's been to actual prison, right? There's a point where you go like, it's enough. It's enough. Everyone involved, directly and slightly indirectly, has lost their job, and the owner has had to pay out a $10 million fine and completely reorganize his front office. How many more pounds of flesh are there? So what happens is Roger Goodell goes up there and says, like, look, here's why we had an independent counsel. Okay, they went through 6 million documents. They released the findings. Okay, but we're not going to release everything else. You're not entitled to that. We're a private enterprise. None of this affects you. There's other things in those emails that you don't need to see, and we don't want to have disclosed. Not just names, but stuff that's shouldn't be public information. So I'm sitting here today defending Roger Goodell because he did everything that was asked. In truth, if you go back and look at the Ray Rice thing, we have no feeling for context. When they suspended Ray Rice for domestic battery, for something that never went to trial, because there was a pretrial diversionary hearing, that was actually the longest suspension for domestic abuse in the history of the NFL. It was not enough. But at the time, Goodell was like, look, we never suspended a guy 2 games for something that didn't even go to trial, pretrial diversionary hearing, first offense. Should they have seen the tape? Yes. Would the tape have changed things? Yes. But I just think sometimes we're not realistic about what is possible when you're in charge. There's also precedent. If you take the team from Dan Snyder, well, what other teams? I mean, now do you the Cal McNair thing? Do you take the team from him? You found something with the Raiders. By the way, the Raiders front office, they fired 3 people before the season. A couple were alleged to be skimming off the top. Okay, do you take the team from Mark Davis because of it? He didn't know. That's probably why he fired those people. This is the realities of how much is under your purview and how much is not. So while Twitter wants more, and the Me Too movement doesn't want to stop, get rid of everybody. Me in the radical center says, look, it was bad old boys club. It was gross. All those dudes lost their job. Good. Now do it the right way. Demand change in how people are treated. Fine the organization as big a fine as you possibly can. $10 million is a lot of money. And see how they react and see how they evolve. And if there's, you can't get rid of an owner who there are no connecting emails or texts or anything, like there's no smoking gun. You can't, because you assume that he had to on some level know. It's not the way it works. You also can't disclose everything when you truly investigate a football team, because there are other things that people don't want out there. Right? This, I'll give you a parallel, and then we're going to get to the Mike Tomlin, Carson Palmer discussion. Here's the parallel. Okay. Going into the Olympics this year, you had many people, especially people who are, you would classify as woke, complaining because athletes weren't allowed to protest during their medal ceremony. The problem with that is not most of the American protests. Okay? It's really not. Protesting police brutality, equal treatment of all human beings. Like, no. The problem is that we only look at it through our own lens. Oh, why don't we protest China? Right? Enes Kanter is protesting China. Well, there's a lot of people who don't like the American way. And what happens when one of those countries wins a gold medal? Why can't they say death to America? Right? It's their form of protest. And oh yeah, by the way, if we're not even considering America or death to America, there are countries that don't like people of other races, people of other cultures. Like we think everybody should and will think like us, damn it. And we should all be free to speak our own minds, but only the own minds which are completely open-minded. Like, yeah, that's not really close to how it works. Not every culture embraces the LGBTQ plus community. They don't. Not every culture embraces interracial relationship. Not every culture accepts Jewish people, Christian people, Muslim people. They don't. Okay? So sometimes you have to draw a line because there's that law of unintended consequences. And if the intended consequence is to change the Washington football team and change their culture and make the owner feel the pain, he had to change the football name. He had to get rid of his entire front office. He also, by the way, fired his coach. He had to step down and put his wife in charge. And they paid $10 million. I don't know how many pounds of flesh you need, but that's a lot of pounds of flesh. Welcome to the Radical Center.